another grammar point with me, Teacher Katie. In these videos, we dive into the details of English grammar to see how it works. Let's get started. Alright everyone, I've got a couple of example sentences for you here. I'd like you to take a look at the example sentences and see if you can find what is in common between the three of them. Here we go, first one. If you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, it boils. When it snows heavily, traffic slows down. Whenever I eat too much, I get a stomachache. Today we're talking about the present real conditional, also known as the zero conditional. And I asked you to try and identify what was in common between those three sentences, and if you said that they're all general truths or scientific facts, then you were right. If you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, it boils, well, that's a scientific fact. Now, those of you who are scientists out there, please don't argue with me. I know that temperature changes based on altitude and the pressure of where you're living, but we're just talking about generally. If you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, it boils. So, let's take a look at the usage. We use this grammar to communicate general truths and scientific facts, things that happen 100% of the time. So, my condition in that first sentence was heating water to 100 degrees Celsius. And what's the result? Well, water boils. Now, what happens if that condition is not met? Let's say you only heat the water to 95 degrees Celsius. Well, the result is that water doesn't boil. So, our fact here, that if you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, it boils, is something that's always true. Let's take a look at the structure. Remember, we're talking about general truths and scientific facts here. If you notice my example sentence, you'll see that I have an if clause first, if you heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, followed by a comma, and then I have my main clause, it boils. Now, I could, of course, switch the order of those two clauses. I could put the main clause first and the if clause second. Water boils if you heat it to 100 degrees Celsius. But please notice if we put the main clause first, we don't use a comma. Now let's take a closer look at the verb tenses that we use. Looking at the if clause, here's our verb in that clause. What verb tense are we using? If you said present simple, you're right. Now let's take a look at the main clause. Here's our verb, boils. As you can see, that one is also present simple. Here are some other examples. When it snows heavily, traffic slows down. You can see we've used present simple in both of these sentences, and this is a general truth. Believe me, I live in Minnesota, and I know for sure that when it snows heavily, traffic slows down. My other example, whenever I eat too much, I get a stomachache. So again, this is a general truth. Using present simple in both parts of the sentence, I'm communicating that this is something that happens to me 100% of the time. Now, you might have also noticed that in those last two sentences, we didn't have the word if. Instead, we used when or whenever. And actually, with the zero conditional, with present real conditional, we often use when or whenever instead of if. It's time to do some practice. Whenever we do practice in these videos, there are 4 steps. First, I want you to pause the video. Then I want you to answer the questions in a notebook. Then after that, you can play the video and finally check your answers with me. So, here are your first practice sentences. Go ahead and pause the video now and write down your answers in notebook. Alright, it's time to check your answers. Go ahead and check along with me as I read the sentences. If people eat too much food, they get fat. When Ella goes to bed late, she has trouble waking up on time. Whenever James drinks coffee at night, he doesn't go to bed until after 1 a.m. If you touch a hot stove, you get burned. I always get angry if someone lies to my face. You cry whenever you cut onions. Ice floats when you drop it in water. We feel tired when we are hungry. So, how'd you do? How many did you get correct out of 16? Let's move on. Here I have some other points about the structure. We just looked at a couple of positive sentences, but now let's take a look at negative sentences. Now, if I'm forming the negative, remember I'm using present simple in both of my clauses, so I'll be using words like doesn't, don't, or am, is, or are not. Here I have several examples. You'll notice that we can use the negative in the main clause or in the if clause. So I'll go ahead and read those sentences for you. If there is no rain, the grass doesn't grow. If we don't eat, we die. Here's another example. Whenever you don't add salt to your food, it tastes bland. Or, when you speak in French, he doesn't understand you. Just like in positive sentences, we could also switch the order of our if clause and our main clause. We could put the main clause first. Just remember, if we do that, we don't use a comma. Now let's take a look at some question formation. Again, we're using the present simple structure to make these questions. I could make yes-no questions, such as, does ice melt if you heat it? Or, is she happy whenever she gets a good grade? Or I could ask WH or information questions, such as, what time do you wake up when you have class? Or, how do you feel when he talks to you that way? Of course, I could use other WH question words, such as when or where. Now, just like in positive and negative sentences, we could switch the order of our questions so that we put our if clause first. And that's totally fine. We just need to remember to put a comma after our if clause. Now it's time to do some practice with negatives and questions. Remember, you need to pause the video and write down the answers in a notebook. Now it's time to check your answers. Go ahead and check along with me as I read the sentences. Number 1. If Aaron doesn't put on sunscreen, he gets a sunburn. When they don't pay their bill on time, they get a late fee. Number 3. Whenever you eat a snack before dinner, you don't finish your meal. If you put alcohol in the freezer, does it freeze? Does she get hungry sooner when she only eats vegetables for lunch? And number 6, what do you do whenever your friend asks you to lend him money? How did you do? How many out of 12 did you get correct? All right, it's time to do some extended practice. Here I have 5 different scenarios, and I'd like you to write 5 sentences using the present real or the zero conditional, answering the question, what do you do when this happens to you? Thanks for watching. This has been a Grammar Point with me, Teacher Katie. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them below. And remember, if you're currently taking one of the courses, please submit your answers to the extended practice section using the link that was provided to you at the beginning of your course session. That's all for now, and until next time, keep practicing English!